Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now what we have here is a graphics card that didn't exactly receive rave reviews when it came out. I am of course talking about the AMD RX 6600 XT. It released in 2021, a time when GPUs were hard to find at reasonable prices. I remember these going for around £450, sometimes higher depending on the model at some retailers. Ridiculous. For the money, performance was underwhelming, and it didn't offer any significant uplift over the previous gen 5700 XT, which came out a couple of years earlier. But that's all in the past. The used market is full of reasonably priced hardware once again, and the 6600 XT here can commonly be found for less than £200, according to the average sold price of the last 5 eBay listings. The same can be said for US dollars. 5700 XTs aren't too dissimilar in price actually, but the newer card has DX12 Ultimate and ray tracing support, for what that's worth. The current price trend makes the 8GB 6600 XT sound like a solid deal for anyone wanting to put together a capable 1080p gaming build. I paid £147 including postage for my one, which has a few marks and scratches here and there, but that of course doesn't affect performance. There will be some instances whereby some games happily utilise the majority of our VRAM buffer at higher settings, but regardless I think the performance at this price point seems pretty reasonable. Let's get into some games then and see what you think. Now I'm going to get ray tracing out the way. The 6600 XT can do it for sure, but it'll need help from FSR to maintain respectable frame rates. Personally, I'd leave it off across the board to be honest, but it's nice to see that this is an actual usable option, even in Cyberpunk 2077, which did better than I thought. Regular, non-ray traced Cyberpunk did even better of course. At 1080p, the resolution we've stuck to for today's video with the high preset and FSR turned off because it will turn on by default, we saw an average frame rate of 79 FPS, a 1% low of 61 and a 0.1% low of 52. So the gameplay was pretty consistent here for the 6600 XT, and this was a nice first result. Counter-Strike 2 at 1080p next with the high preset and any form of anti-aliasing turned off for an average of 216 FPS, the 1% low was 117 and the 0.1% low was 37. Now for an even higher frame rate than this of course, you may want to turn things down to low as I usually do, but as this is a graphics card benchmark, I thought I'd turn things up a little bit here. Now I've tried to avoid upscaling across the board today aside from that initial ray tracing result, and in the games that really do need it in order to hit at least 60 FPS. Starfield required the use of FSR 3 here. Now I will show you the native result first of all. We did manage to hit 56 FPS, which is decent in my opinion, but what let this performance down was the percentile lows of 39 and 33 respectively. There were some seriously significant stutters here and there. With FSR 3 however and 70% resolution scale we saw 69 FPS, nice, with a 1% low of 53 and a 0.1% low of 34. So that 0.1% low wasn't actually much different, but overall the game was a lot more consistent this time around and didn't look too much worse for it. I did stick with the medium preset, which didn't actually run any worse than low for some reason. Baldur's Gate 3 is up next at the high preset with TAA enabled for an average of 85 FPS. I was running around the city here as I usually do for the benchmarks, and most of the time we did see at least 60 frames per second, but our 0.1% report did come back at 47 FPS with a 0.1% low of 34, so a couple of dips and drops here and there, but nothing too major. Elden Ring up next. I kept the 60 FPS cap in place here and we averaged that of course with the high preset. I also briefly tried the maximum preset and we saw the same result, albeit with a few more dips and drops to the high 40s. The 1% low in this instance was 53 and the 0.1% frame rate was 45, so overall it was a decent experience for the 6600 XT in Elden Ring. Now I've added Fallout 4 back into the benchmark roster recently because of its uplift in popularity thanks to the Amazon TV show. 127 FPS on average here. I would recommend keeping a cap in place just like in Elden Ring. Reason being is that the latest next gen patch broke F4 SE, or at least it remains broken at the time of this upload, which meant that the high physics FPS fix was also broken. I covered this in yesterday's video. The game will be all sped up if you run it at a frame rate that's too high, and you might notice some of that going on here. It tends to occur worse when we're running at over 130, 140 FPS, at least in my experience, so I'd recommend keeping some sort of cap in place for this one for the time being anyway. For Forza Horizon 5 with the Extreme preset, we did get a VRAM warning. This is what I was talking about at the start. Some games do utilise the majority of our VRAM buffer. I didn't notice any adverse effects apart from the warning. It said we were running out of VRAM, but the game still ran fine. It was really smooth, 86 FPS on average, with a 1% low of 69 and a 0.1% low of 66. This is why, though, I think the 6600 XT in 2024 is very much a 1080p gaming card. This is the resolution where it will do best and where it will last the longest as part of a gaming rig. I then tried GTA 5 at the highest settings with the advanced settings turned all the way up and FXAA enabled for 119 FPS on average, with a 1% low of 85 and a 0.1% low of 64. As expected, GTA 5 doesn't give our PC much trouble here. I've paired the 6600 XT with an i5-12400F today, a pairing which I think is a pretty solid one, and the CPU itself is also a very good sub £200 or dollar option these days. In fact, it's sometimes closer to £100, and for that money it makes a lot of sense. But this is all about the card, not the CPU. Marvel Spider-Man Remastered 1080p with the high preset TAA for 111 FPS. The 1% low in this case was a very nice 69 and the 0.1% low was 53. The Witcher 3 Next Gen, now this is what you call a true Next Gen update. The Ultra preset here, HBAO plus SSR low and FXAA enabled, 116 FPS on average. The 1% low was 79 and the 0.1% low was 57. So all in all, a pretty consistent experience in DX12 mode for The Witcher 3. In Red Dead Redemption 2, I set the textures to ultra and everything else including TAA was set to high. The geometry LOD was maxed out and the grass LOD or level of detail was set to 2 out of 10. On average, the 6600 XT did better than I expected with 103. There will be some dips and drops in and around those busy areas such as Valentine here. 72 FPS was that 1% low and the 0.1% low was 48. Fortnite 1080p with a medium preset. I was running this in DX12 mode, but I just as much recommend DX11. DX12 seems to be smoother overall, but DX11 tends to get you higher averages, at least in my experience. 112 was the average here at the medium preset with 100% res scaling, and the 1% low was 84, followed by a 0.1% figure of 27. To finalise, 1080p with the balanced preset. I did start off with the Ultra preset and that actually ran fine as well. We were still seeing over 100 FPS, just under 120 from what I recall. But here with the balanced preset we were seeing 154 with a 1% low of 116 and a 0.1% figure of 42. All in all then, the 6600 XT in 2024 makes a ton more sense than it did in 2021, that's for sure. These can be found all over the used market now. I can't guarantee what they've been used for, of course, but I'm pretty happy with my purchase here. £140 for a used card that's very capable at 1080p and could most certainly be pushed to 1440p in some instances as well. Seems like a solid deal. But let me know what you think down below. Are there any other options that you would recommend instead? Cards that you've seen at similar price points and cards that perhaps you'd like me to review on this channel, of course. Leave your thoughts and everything else down below in the comments section, and hopefully I'll see all of you next time.